Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Mob Museum. My name is Jeff Schumacher. I'm the Senior Director of Content here at the museum. We are incredibly excited about tonight's programming. First and foremost, we have Diane Capone, eldest living granddaughter of Al Capone. She's here with us, and she's going to provide some unique insights into the man who is easily the most well-known figure in this museum. Second, after the program, you'll have the opportunity to purchase a copy of Diane's new book. And if you haven't seen it, it looks like this. And it is a wonderful book. It will provide insights into Al Capone and the family that you simply can't get anywhere else. We're going to discuss some of those things tonight, but there's a lot more in the book that we won't get to. Third, we're holding a last call celebration in the Speakeasy tonight. Do we all know why it's called Last Call tonight? Good. It's because 100 years ago today, January 16th, 1920, was Prohibition Eve, the night before the federal ban on the manufacture, distribution, and sale of alcohol in the United States. This was significant in this story that we're telling tonight, and of course in the whole story of organized crime in America. And so I encourage everyone certainly to come down to the Speakeasy after the book signing. Come on down and enjoy that. There's one more thing I want to mention before we get started. Just yesterday, we launched our new smartphone app. Is everybody aware of this? Yeah, you might have gotten a little card as you were coming in. Yes, we now have an app, and it is awesome. Did everyone, if you received that small card, you can, learn how to download the app onto your phone and check out all the great material that we have on there. So definitely encourage you to do that. All right. First of all, okay, the preliminaries are out of the way. Welcome, Diane, to the Mob Museum.
My pleasure.
And,
thank you.
we're so happy to have you here.
Thank you.
I think it would be appropriate to start by having you introduce your family who are in the audience. It's not just Diane tonight. We have a whole crew.
It's my pleasure. Thank you all for coming. It's really been lovely having a chance to meet so many of you, and some of you have read my book and had nice things to say, which was delightful to hear. I really wouldn't be here, the book wouldn't be here, if it weren't for a couple of people in the audience tonight. One of them is my editor-in-chief, my husband, Don. And the other one is my computer guru. My sister, Barbara Capone, my younger sister, I won't ask her to get up because she's recovering from a serious knee surgery. But I can't tell you how many times in the course of working on this that I would lose something on the computer, and I'd call her and say, "Babs," her name's Barbara, I call her Babs. So, I'd say, "Babs, I can't find this, I lost this chapter." And she'd say, "No, not to worry, not to," and she'd go in and she'd pull it out. So she completely helped me pull the book together and format it and send it off, and so without her and the support of my husband, it really wouldn't have gotten done. And her husband, George, is with us tonight, my brother-in-law, so I'm delighted and proud to be able to introduce you.
Excellent, excellent. So maybe the next logical thing to do is to have you explain why you decided to write this book now.
Okay, I'd be happy to. Over the course of the years, so many books have been written, including one, back about 6 or 7, no, maybe 8 years ago now, that purported to be the inside story of the Capone family. And it wasn't. The person who wrote it is a family member, but the book was inaccurate. And it hurt me because some of the things that were in the book were not just inaccurate, they really were not very nice comments about members of my family. And so I thought I really have to tell the true story and correct some of the errors, and so that's what I decided to do. So when I began it, I thought, first of all, I want to tell the true story. I want to tell the private story of my grandparents, the story that most people have no idea of. And secondly, I wanted to have a chance to honor my family, my sister Ronnie, who passed away 12 years ago, my grandmother, my mother, all the wonderful women that I was lucky enough to know. And I'm just glad that finally I feel like, it's out there. And also the realization that I'm getting older. If I don't tell it now, I may not have the opportunity to. And so thinking about those three things, telling the true story, being able to acknowledge the people in my family, and also the reality that I was getting older, and if I was ever going to tell the story, it had to be now. Everybody who were the critical people, my grandparents, my parents, and my older sister Ronnie, had all died. Yeah. So it was like, if you don't do it, nobody else can. So anyway, I'm glad that I finally was able to.
And we're glad you did as well.
Thank you.
So we should ask next. Now, you were very young when your grandfather passed away.
Yes.
But you do have some memories of him from when you were young. Can you share some of those?
I'd be happy to. Probably the most poignant memory that I have is when Papa died. We always called him Papa. He died when I was only 3 years old. In fact, we had just celebrated. My birthday was 2 days ago. Papa's birthday is tomorrow. He turned 21 the day that Prohibition went into effect. It was a nice birthday present for him. We had been at his house. My family had been at his house for celebrating Christmas a few weeks before, and then celebrating our birthdays. And he was fine. He was in great spirits and seemed to be just doing great. And then all of a sudden, very quickly, wound up with pneumonia and got very sick very quickly. Just within a day or so of the time he died, my mother and father took us to the house. And I have this very poignant and really indelible recollection of going up the stairs. My mother had my sister Ronnie on one side and me on the other. And she kept saying, "Come on, girls, Papa's waiting for you." And we went up to the master bedroom. A lot of people were there, but everybody was quiet. It was very hushed. And Daddy was leaning over my grandfather. And I guess my dad said to him, "The girls are here." And Papa turned his head and went, for us to come up to him. And so Daddy lifted Ronnie up to kiss Papa first. And then he lifted me and I kissed him. And he said, "I love you, baby girl." And that was the last time I saw his face. He passed away within a day or so of that night. But that's a memory that was so indelible, I'll never forget it. He also was a very loving, affectionate grandfather, and he used to love to walk us around the garden and point out different things. We had little figures, little elves, like Sleeping Beauty and the elves, they were around the ceramic elves that were around the garden, and he loved to point things like that out to us. And so I remember that. I remember him playing with us. I remember him laughing a lot and always enjoying having his girls around.
So your grandmother, May, is the person from whom you learned so much family history, and she lived quite a bit longer than Al.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about her, just about her and your relationship with her?
I'd be happy to. My grandmother lived for 40-some years after my grandfather died, and so I was really lucky. Even though she lived in Florida, she used to come out to California almost every year, and she would stay with me. I had little ones. My sisters were all out working, and so she'd stay at my house. And over the years, she started telling me stories of her childhood and her relationship with Papa and how they met. And it was a very, they were kind of, I guess the best way to put it is star-crossed lovers. He came from an Italian background. She came from an Irish background. I actually took I GPSed their houses that they grew up in, and they were 1.3 miles apart, but they were in different worlds. The Irish had one world, the Italians had another, and the Italians were looked down on by the Irish, just as Irish had been looked down on by others, in their time. But it was not a very popular get-together, and my grandmother and grandfather both worked at United Box Company in Brooklyn, and I know my grandmother used to tell stories about how her sister would come home and she'd say, "Ma, she was talking to the Italian again. She was talking to the Italian again." And little by little, they got to know each other. I think they both were quite taken with each other from the very beginning. And then eventually, they did get together. But when my grandfather first came to my grandmother's house, her mother, my grandma Bridget, took a broom and literally knocked him off the porch and didn't want anything to do with him. "You get out of here. You can't see her." And Papa, of course, wanted to, spend some time with her, had very good intentions. And my grandmother said, "No, you're not having anything to do with her." And so, but over the years, not even years, it was over the months, because my great-grandmother didn't live all that long after that, but they became very close, and he was crazy about her, and she was a little tiny woman, about 4 feet 10, became very crazy about him. And in fact, my grandfather had this wonderful charisma and this energy, and he was very optimistic about everything. He always, everything's going to be fine, everything's going to be fine. And my grandmother had lost her own father at a very early age, and my grandmother was one of 7 children. These kids were growing up in Brooklyn. Their dad had died. It was tough times. And when Papa came into the picture, when Al Capone came into the picture, it was like he just kind of gave a boost of confidence to everybody. And eventually, everybody was just crazy about him.
And I think the heart of your book really are the insights into the relationship between Al Capone and his wife. It's really a love story, right? Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the difficulties. She was Irish, he was Italian. There was also the fact that Al became involved with some dangerous activities later, shall we say?
Understatement.
What was how did this dangerous nature of his business affect the family? And were there incidents where there was some concern?
As you, I'm sure know, families were really kept away from anything that had to do with the business. And in those days, the other people who were involved in those businesses respected the fact that that the families were to be, they were sacrosanct. They were not to be touched. And so I think that my grandfather worried a bit about my grandmother and his family, because they all lived together in this house in Chicago, because he knew accidents could happen. Things do happen. My grandmother said that she really didn't know an awful lot for a long time about what all was happening until she started seeing it in the newspaper. And initially she thought, "Oh, this can't be. But they never talked about it. He just said, "You just, trust me, everything's fine, I'll take care of everything." She did tell one story when she was living in the house on Prairie Avenue that made it clear that she was very concerned about what was going on. There were a number of attempts to assassinate my grandfather over the years. And on this one particular occasion at night, my grandfather was not at home, and my grandmother was standing in the upstairs window, and she was looking out through the curtain, and she could see this big black car go by filled with men, and she could see, even in the moonlight, the reflection of these, the metal, the guns, and so forth. And she didn't know whether it was the police, she didn't know if it was some other gang or what it was. And she said it didn't really make any difference to her. They were all a threat to him. And but she really voiced concern when that happened. And I'm not sure, it may very well be that that incident or ones similar to that are what prompted him to buy the property in Florida. In 1928. The family, my grandmother and my father and my grandfather, moved to Florida.
And that's a great segue, because the family moves to Florida, and I believe in the book you talk about those early years in Florida may consider those the best, really the best years.
It was a wonderful time for her. For one thing, he was around a lot more because he was away from home a lot when they were in Chicago. He was home a lot more. And my dad was growing up. My dad had had some health problems, and he was born very prematurely. They almost lost him. He only weighed 2 pounds when he was born. In fact, my dad grew up to be a big man. He was just under 6 feet tall, and he weighed, easily 200 pounds. And he said, "Can you believe it? I only weighed 2 pounds when I was born." It was just always kind of a joke in the family that here he'd started out quite so small. When my dad was born, I have to tell you this little segue too. He was born at home in Brooklyn in the Coughlin household. And my grandmother took him and put him in a box with like a little wool shawl under him, and set it on the door of the oven to keep him warm. They didn't have incubators. And when the doctor came, he said probably my grandmother had saved him. So even though my grandmother was not thrilled about this relationship, she was certainly thrilled to be able to have had a part in saving my dad. And those years in Florida after they moved down there were parties and happy times. And by that time, Daddy was about 10 years old. He was healthy, he was robust, he was the light of their lives. And so it was a wonderful time for her.
Let's talk about your father just a little bit more, Albert Francis, known as Sonny to many, many people. He knew his father both in Chicago and in Florida.
Yeah.
When he had retired, more or less. And tell us about your father. What was he like?
Well, Daddy was Albert Francis, Sonny Capone. Was just every girl's dream of what a father would be like. He thought we were the best, most wonderful, beautiful people in the world, and he told us that all the time. And so he was extremely affectionate. He played with us. I can remember chasing him around the table, and I mean, literally, he liked to be with us. He had 4 daughters, and so he taught us all how to box, how to throw a football, how to shoot. Babs became a good shot, very good shot, and used to go hunting with him sometimes. He just was fun to be around, and I made the comment earlier this evening about that song, about it was a party to be with him. It was a party to be with him. He was always happy and loved having us around, loved having our husbands around later on. But all the kids in the neighborhood wanted to come over because he taught everybody how to play chess. He'd load the car with 15 people with no safety belts and take us all to the ice cream parlor and buy ice cream cones for everybody. He was a very devoted father.
So it's interesting because, he went through a very tough time as a kid.
Yeah.
So, Al Capone is convicted of tax evasion in 1931, goes to Cook County Jail and then to Atlanta,
Right.
ultimately to Alcatraz. We'll
Right.
talk about that in a minute. But all during that time, I mean, Sonny got to visit him a few times, but it must have been incredibly hard on him.
It was incredibly painful, and my father had a very special bond with his dad. My grandfather used to speak to Daddy, and he would call him son of my heart. He even wrote to him that way when he was in prison, son of my heart. And Papa, it was heartbreaking for him to have to tell his son and his wife that he was going to be leaving, but he initially thought that he was going to be able to be close by and see them. I think my father and my grandmother spent a good bit of the years when Papa was away trying to put on a good face for each other. She was always trying to, make him happy and do whatever she could, have his friends over to the house, do whatever she could to make Daddy happy. And my dad was also always putting on a good face for her. He didn't want her to know how heartbroken he was.
It got even tougher, of course, when I was transferred to Alcatraz.
Yeah.
Tough for the family, sure, but also tough for him. And you
Yeah.
have some stories about that I think a lot of people don't realize or don't know.
Yeah, some of these stories are in the book. Papa was in Alcatraz for about 4 years. He had gone from Cook County Jail in Chicago, and there were appeals taking place, which ultimately over 6 or 7 months never happened, never came through or were approved, and went to Atlanta, to the penitentiary there for a couple of years. And then when he was moved to Chicago, it was a totally different...
To Alcatraz.
I'm sorry, I said Chicago, I meant Alcatraz. It was a totally different experience. His family couldn't see him on any kind of a regular basis. There were numerous threats. There were numerous attempts to, one time they put lye in his coffee. Other times he was stabbed by people. And on some occasions, he fought back. Many times, people tried to talk him into funding escape plans and so forth. And when he rejected these things, because he had promised my grandmother, I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to keep my head down. I want to get out for good behavior, and I want to come home to you. And so he did. He tried to keep his head down, but there were a few times when he reacted. And of course, it cost him dearly.
The prison really changed him, though, especially in Alcatraz. Sort of gained some renewed interest in religion and peace of mind. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Both the Italian side of the family and the Irish side of the family were devout Catholics. My grandmother, all the years she lived in Chicago, she and my great-grandmother, Teresa, used to walk around the corner and go to St. Columbanus and go to Mass every morning. And they were very devout. My grandfather, like unfortunately a lot of men, didn't embrace the faith as much as the women did. And so even though he'd been raised in this had this Catholic childhood, he wasn't particularly devout. And I think he went through a good bit of his life feeling like he was in control and he was running things. And it wasn't until he was in Alcatraz that he had this episode with one of the other prisoners where there had been a fight, and he wound up being put in solitary confinement. And I've never been there, so I don't know what this is like, but apparently it's quite horrible for anybody. Even prisoners who had come from Alcatraz said later, if a person was sent down there for even a few days, it could make them lose their mind, and a couple of weeks, and they really could lose their mind. My grandfather was sent to solitary as a result of this altercation he had with one of the prisoners. And in the midst of, just feeling like, how could I let myself, get caught up in this and feeling really desperate, he felt that he had had some kind of an awakening. I don't know if it was he was banging his head against the wall or banging his head with his fist because he was mad at himself that he had let himself get taken into this exchange with this other prisoner. And he told my grandmother years later, when he was at home in Florida, that he believed that he'd been given a second chance. He thought he was going to die. He said, and he prayed that please don't let me die. Let me see my family. And in the midst of that, he felt that he'd had some kind of an experience where it was like an awakening. And he began to realize that a lot of what had happened was his own fault. He'd brought a lot of these things on himself. And within a very short time of that, a young priest started coming to Alcatraz, and Papa started chatting with him and ultimately started taking the sacraments, started going to Mass again, and embraced having his religion back again. And once he came to Florida, once he came out of prison, he went to St. Pat's, where my dad had gone to school. My parents were married there. St. Pat's is St. Patrick's Catholic Church and School in Miami Beach. And my grandfather went there frequently and ultimately died in a state of grace, with the priest there giving him the final sacraments and so forth. And so it was like he had finally made peace, not only with his family and with the world, but with God. And so I think he died a very peaceful death.
One of the, sometimes it's difficult to talk about, but he had tertiary syphilis, basically,
Yes.
for a long time.
Yes.
And it undoubtedly affected his health.
Yeah.
But I think in the book you reveal that, I mean, when you and others would say, mentally, he was much more alert and aware and quick than I think some people have been led to believe when he came out of prison.
I think that, no question, my grandfather was in the final stages, what they call the tertiary stage of syphilis. My grandfather never knew he had it as a young man. And if you know anything about syphilis, it goes dormant. And after the first few weeks of having it, you don't even know you have it. And what I didn't know until I read Deirdre Baer's biography of my grandfather is something like 15% of the adult population in America was exposed to it and didn't know they had been exposed. And the vast majority of them recovered from it the way you would the flu. He was one of the people who didn't recover, and it went into, ultimately, it started damaging his organs. And it was not diagnosed, though, until many, many years later, and it was already what they considered the tertiary stage. And there were no antibiotics at that time, and so he wasn't properly treated. Many people, in fact, my grandfather even said, at the time, my grandmother repeated this to us, that people came to Florida to visit him who had been associates of his in business. And they walked away and said, he's batty as a fruitcake. And Papa would say to my grandmother afterwards, let them think what they want. It bought me my ticket out. It's my ticket out of that life. And so let them think what they want. And some people did express, concern that he had severe limitations. I know his doctors did as well. But he lived a very happy life, and being well cared for and not having to deal with the kind of fear that he dealt with for so many years. I think he felt that he was, life was very good. My uncle, who just passed away a year ago, was a young boy when he met my father, and In fact, he was around 10 when he met my grandfather. He was around the same age that my father had been when my grandfather left to go to prison. And my uncle used to say he loved to play in the pool with my grandfather. I mean, they were buddies. And Papa would teach him how to play cards. And my uncle used to say, I would stand there and he'd tell me what to do, how to play cards. And he said, I never had the sense that he didn't know what he was saying or that there was any kind of agitation or anything like that. And my grandfather, by the time when he died, my uncle was 17 or 18 years old. So he was not a child. It was not just a child's observation that he was pretty astute. And other members of the family said the same thing. They did not see this terrible, erratic behavior that's been talked about by some people.
As you've come to know more about your grandfather's life, how do you, this is that question you have to ask, right? How do you reconcile the gentle person, the peaceful person that you've described in his later years with the biggest bootlegger in Chicago in the 1920s? How did, it's an interesting, it's one extreme or the other, right?
No question. When my sister and I, in those years or those months when my sister was in the hospital and we talked about it, we used to say, he's a conundrum. He's a conundrum. How could you figure out, what was going on? He had these two incredibly different sides. There's no question that he did a lot of bad things, that he was involved in a lot of really terrible things. But I never saw that side of him. And those members of our family who knew him never saw that side of him either. I don't know the answer to this. I don't, I've thought about it many times. How do you ever really know another person? And especially someone who seems there's so many such contrasts in their behavior or their way of living. The only thing I can say is that he managed to compartmentalize a lot of it. He seemed to be able to set it aside. When he walked through the door, he was just very much a devoted family man.
I want to ask you a couple questions about being a Capone, right? That this name is so recognizable in the world, and pros and cons to that. Let's start with your father, though. How did this, being Sonny Capone, affect him as he was in his career and in his life?
I think my father spent his whole life trying to be, as I was mentioning to you, beyond reproach. He was always trying to put on a good face. He was always trying to be the perfect child, the perfect friend to the people he encountered, always making the right little gesture to their parents, always trying to convince them that he wasn't a bad guy. And I think my dad spent a lot of time feeling like he was trying to live up to, or live down his last name. When he was, after they moved to Florida, during the years that he was going to St. Patrick's, where he met my mom, even when he had friends over to the house, and he used to love to entertain, my grandmother would send letters for him to the families of friends that were coming over to visit. They had to sign like a permission slip to be allowed to come to the house, because she didn't want to take a chance that kids were coming to the house and their parents would be upset about it and think there was something wrong. So the parents had to sign that it was okay for them to come and visit. I don't think it was a very easy time. I think it was really a challenge.
And you actually had a little experience, too, with this when you were about 6 years old, I think.
Yeah. We just grew up in this loving family. We didn't know anything about Capone. We didn't know anything about it being anything to worry about. And when I first started school, within a few days of the time I started school, I went out to the playground and I was climbing up on the monkey bars or one of these, things on the playgrounds. And the kids said, "Oh, come on, let's go, it's Capone." And they, they left, they ran away. And I sat there and I thought, what happened? I totally didn't get it. And so when my mom picked us up that afternoon, I told her, and she said, "Okay, honey, it's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. We'll talk to Daddy about this tonight." And so that night, my dad came into the bedroom where my sister Ronnie and I were, and he sat down and he said, "I want to tell you about Papa. He was a very famous man, and he made a lot of money. Daddy never elaborated on what kind of business he was in or how he made his money. He just said there are an awful lot of people who will want to get close to you because they think there's still a lot of money sitting around," which there wasn't. But he said, "You have to be beyond reproach. Other people can make mistakes. Other people can sleep in the gutter, and nobody cares. But because you're a Capone, people are looking to judge you. And so you have to live your life and be beyond reproach." And I remember as a 6-year-old little girl laying in bed that night thinking, I am going to be so nice. They're not going to care what my name is. They're going to want to be my friend no matter what. And truly feeling that my dad said we had to be beyond reproach, I was going to do my best to live up to what he wanted from us.
And of course, Capone is your maiden name, and so you didn't have that name later on, and a lot of people didn't even know that you were a Capone. Was that sort of a conscious thing on your part to kind of not
It
talk
was on
about
my part, yeah. I think of all my sisters, I probably was the most closed-mouthed about it. I took after my grandmother a lot. Everybody said that I looked more like her than my other sisters. I acted more like her than my other sisters. And she was very reserved and didn't, ever talk about it. She just lived a very reserved life, especially after my grandfather was gone. And so I worked for 20 years as a college counselor, and nobody at the college knew who I was. My neighbors for 15 years didn't know who I was. And after Ronnie died, my sister, I had to tell my neighbors what my maiden name is, because I knew we were going to have a memorial for Ronnie, and there were going to be people coming from all over, and a lot of people from Chicago, and the name Capone was going to get mentioned all over the place. And my other sisters didn't mind telling all their friends and people they knew. I was the one that was more reserved about it. So I literally had to tell my neighbors just the night before the memorial service that, by the way, guys, you're going to hear this name pop up. My sister Babs probably was the best. Babs didn't get married. She was really smart. She didn't get married till she was 30, and so she lived with the Capone name for a lot longer than the rest of us did. My sisters and I, my other sisters and I, had gotten married earlier. Babs was a businesswoman, and she just had so much moxie. She used the name. I mean, she'd be in business meetings and she'd say, "Now I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse," and people loved it. They got a big kick out of it. So she handled it much better than I did.
So all this time later, 2020, do you feel like that issue is kind of past now? Are people over that sort of issue with the name?
Well, the remarkable thing is, my two closest friends always say, "Boy, you're really coming out of the closet, aren't you?" Because even to say my name is Diane Capone is so unusual for me, because I just never did. But the most amazing thing that's happened, and it's just the phenomena of the world we live in now, people don't think of him quite the way they used to years ago. There doesn't seem to be a lot of negativity about him. He's just somebody who was like a celebrity. And I became very conscious of this when Deirdre Bair, a friend of mine, was writing the biography about my grandfather. And she did research about all the different things that were going on about the Capone being, wanting to be something to do with Capone all over the world. I mean, there are places where they have postage stamps with my grandfather's
Yeah.
picture on it. I mean, they're just amazing things, and it's just like he's another celebrity now. There's not the negative attitude about him, and so it's been wonderful. Everybody's been lovely.
And I know in doing the research for your book, you were fortunate to meet Deirdre Bair, who has been here at the museum. Some of you may have been here for that a couple of years ago. And also John Binder, the historian from Chicago, who's also spoken here. Did you get an opportunity to meet any extended family members when you were working on this, that kind of thing?
I did, and Deirdre brought a lot of this about because she, in doing research, got to meet my cousin Brian Gabriel, who lives in the Chicago area, and she connected us, so we became very friendly. And my other cousin, Corey Hart, who lives now in Indiana, and
just to be clear, that's not the real famous Corey Hart. That's the other Corey Hart.
That's the great grandson of Hart, Richard Two Gun Hart. Yeah, he's the great grandson of my grandfather's oldest brother, who lived his whole life as a Hart, and his 4 sons never knew that they were related to the Capone family until very late in life. And so I've gotten to know them. There are a few cousins, different cousins that I've gotten to meet, and it's been lovely. I have to say, just to interject one little thing, John Binder and Deirdre Bair contacted me a number of years ago when they were both working on their books. And they have been so incredibly wonderful to me. Both of them proofed my book. Both of them made suggestions. John, who knows more about history than I do, says, no, this is not right. That should be this. And so they both were incredibly supportive. And we used to laugh about it because we all kind of became friends together, that Deirdre was handling the biography, John Binder was handling the history of that era, and I was writing the personal story, and so we kind of felt like our little pieces of the puzzle all kind of fit together.
Perfect. I think maybe this might be a good time to open it up to questions from the audience. As usual, we're going to have, we'll have you raise your hand, and we'll bring a microphone around so we can hear you, everybody can hear your question. So why don't we get started? If you have a question for Diane, and I know you do. Here's one in the middle, Ashley. We'll bring a microphone around.
Do you remember the sound of his voice and how he spoke?
You know, it's really tough to say that, to be able to give you a good answer about that. I heard, it was almost like baby talk, baby girl, and oh, you're so precious, but it was almost like baby talk that I got from my grandfather. I don't remember my grandfather ever speaking, profoundly, or I can't tell you what is. I always thought my father probably sounded a lot like my dad, like my grandfather. And my father had a wonderful voice, and I certainly remember that. He also had a very good singing voice.
And your grandfather was very musical, actually.
Papa was very musical and loved to dance also.
Oh.
But yeah, he became interested in music. He always loved music, but he became interested in actually writing music and performing while he was in Alcatraz.
Right. We have another question here.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
How many children did your grandfather have? How many did your father have siblings?
My dad was an only child.
And not really by choice, because Al probably would have had as many as he could have.
Oh, absolutely. My grandmother, too. They both came from big families, and I think it was always, they had always hoped that they were going to have a large family. It just didn't happen.
Right. There's one up here.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you think that Capone et al. Feigned mental illness to get out of Alcatraz?
No, I don't. I think he did have a lot of health issues while he was in Alcatraz, and he was released from Alcatraz because he had done his time. He finished it with good behavior, but he was there for over 4 years. And when he left Alcatraz, he was taken to Terminal Island, where there's another prison, because he had been convicted of some other lesser crime, and so he finished out his time there. But my grandfather went to prison in 31 and was not released until 39. He served a long time, and no, he didn't get any freebies because of his health issues.
Did your father have health issues growing up? Did he have problems with hearing? Or?
He did. My father was hearing impaired, and went through a couple of major mastoid surgeries and wore hearing aids all the time we were growing up, and was hearing impaired. But once he got to be about 7 or 8 years old, 8 or 9 maybe, he was a pretty healthy little kid, and did just great after that.
Another one?
What did your family think during the Geraldo Al Capone vault debacle?
That's a good question.
If you have a chance to look at my book, at the very back of the book, the very last paragraph is about that, but I'll be happy to share it with you. It's I think, a funny story. My dad lived in California by the time that was taking place in the 80s. And Daddy, I was watching this with him, and I said, Daddy, do you think Geraldo's ever going to find anything? And Daddy said, oh, yeah. Is it all right if I say what he said?
Maybe the version you used.
Oh, okay. And so Daddy said, oh, yeah, he'll find something. And I said, what do you think he's going to find? And he said, when he gets through, there's going to be a big sign on the wall, Geraldo, F.U., signed Al Capone.
Do we have one here?
I'm curious, with the historical existence of your family, if you were drawn to learn more about the organized crime as it changed over the years, and did it appeal to you, like educational reasons?
You know, I have to say no. It really didn't. I've learned more, certainly since I was writing the book, than I ever knew before, and that's largely because of John Binder and Deirdre Bayer, because they did such extensive research. But I really never did learn an awful lot more about it. I mean, I'm finding it much more fascinating now than I did, but no, I never pursued. Well, and part of it was, quite honestly, when we were, all through my life, we were always told so much of what's being said is inaccurate. He was accused of things that hadn't happened, or if he'd slept in every bed that they said he'd slept in, he wouldn't have lived long enough to do that, because he couldn't have spread himself that thinly. But a lot of what happened during those years of his life was written up, and sometimes it was embellished, and stories were told. And so all the time we were growing up, we were told most of it is not true, don't pay any attention to it, it's inaccurate. And so I really didn't pay an awful lot of attention to it until I grew up.
We have a question over here.
Hi there. A couple of months ago, we learned about Before Bugsy and the family and all the real things that happened. What about a movie, since you've got all this great insight, family's still here? Anything in the planning works possibly to give out insights and a real good look versus Jimmy Cagney and Elliot Ness and all those guys? Thank you.
Thank you for asking. I think it would really be fun. I think it would really, really be great fun to do something like that. We have no plans or no one's expressed any interest in doing that. Actually, Jeff made the comment today when we were talking earlier, if I were going to make a movie, I'd want to make it about that period in his life between the time he was about 11 and the time he got together with your grandmother, because he found that particular era or that particular part of his life so interesting, and I think it was too, but I don't know. I have no idea what the future will bring.
We have one here.
I actually don't have a question. I have a story to share also. So my grandmother was born in 1912 and raised in Chicago. And growing up, I always heard this story that when she was young, there was a group of neighborhood kids, and Al Capone bought everybody ice cream. So I thought that was fantastic to come here and get a different side of him, because I could kind of get that from her, from stories she would have growing up. So I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you so much. That's really nice of you to share that.
I mean, and then just to elaborate on that, I think you confirmed this. I mean, all of my reading on this indicates just that, certainly he was, a crime boss and all that, but he was an incredibly generous person with the money that he made. And I mean, it was literally handing money to people in the streets of Chicago back in the day, especially when the Depression hit. And so that story sounds right.
My father told me a story one time about being a little boy in Chicago, and his father took him with him to some kind of a dinner, and it was being held in the basement of a hotel or something, like a banquet. And there were a lot of all men there. And while they were getting ready to serve the dinner, they looked up, and my dad saw this. The basement windows, there were little newsboys looking in the window. And Papa said, "Get those kids in here and feed them." And Daddy said he just remembered feeling very proud that Papa wasn't going to eat until the kids got fed. And it was and we heard the stories over and over again about Papa giving $100 tips to newsboys and saying, "Take that home to your mom." He was a very generous man. It's probably why he never had any money left by the time he died.
Why don't we take one more question right here in the front, and then we're going to wrap it up and sell and sign some books.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Have you had time to visit or go through the Mob Museum? And if so, did you learn anything that you didn't know, or what was your impression of the exhibits?
Well, thank you for asking that. I have not. Today is the first time I just came earlier to meet Jeff, and then we came back this evening for the presentation. So I can't wait. My sister and her husband had a chance to walk around and see everything, and I'm hoping that I will too. I'm looking forward to it. I've heard from everybody that it's just fantastic, so I'm really looking forward to it. I do have to say the speakeasy is fabulous. It was hard for me to sit still. It was wonderful.
Well, Diane, thank you very much for taking some time with us
happy to be
today.
here. Thank you very much. Thank you. My pleasure.
We're going to transition to the retail store for the book signing, and you can ask additional questions there and get your book signed.
Happy.
And then we have part 3, which is the last call event in the speakeasy. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.